Well, thank you, Marla. And thanks to Christy for inviting me to come and speak. And I'm going to be sharing a little bit tonight about a project that Genesee Land Trust has been working on with regards to invasives and emerging high priority invasives in particular. First, I'm going to sort of give a brief overview of the organization and of the Land Trust. I know folks volunteer through the Master Naturalist program often with Land Trust, but it's always helpful for me to sort of know a little bit about them and set the stage. So I work full-time for Genesee Land Trust. We're based out of Rochester, New York. We work in Monroe, Wayne, and some of the surrounding counties. In addition to Rochester's urban center, some of the farmlands are Wayne County, and some great habitat lands along Lake Ontario are sort of our focuses. We've got 8 full-time staff and 3 part-time staff, and have preserved around 7,000 acres in total. So again, just that intro. Each land trust is very unique. They focus on local or regional conservation goals, and they're all, for the most part, nonprofits working for the public good. So, you know, when we think about the public good, we think about conserving natural resources that benefit everyone, whether that's clean water, habitat protection, access to nature for physical and mental health, and mitigating impacts from climate change, to name a few. Many land trusts offer programs to the public that connect people with the outdoors through events like, birding, recreation events that get people outside, citizen science opportunities, habitat management, community involvement, and everything in between. Because if we're not engaging the next group of conservationists now, the future will be a scary place. So that's something land trusts often focus on. And really, there are 2 main tools that I would suggest your local land trust probably uses, and those are conservation easement and fee ownership. So the first one that's pretty straightforward is ownership and fee. So that's acquiring all the rights to the property. There's a great sort of analogy by Steve Swartz of a box of pencils. If you think of real estate and transactions as a box of pencils, you can give certain pencils away to people. You can let them borrow it. You can let them keep it. Some get shortened as they're sharpened. Some are broken. And what these tools do are sort of gather back those rights that are needed to accomplish conservation goals. So ownership and fee is really owning all those pencils. The other tool is the conservation easement, which really restricts development of the property. So that's often a tool over private land, where it's still privately owned, say farmland, for example, or unique habitat, but a land trust may monitor it once each year at a minimum to make sure that the landowner is following a set of rules that run with the land. So whoever owns the land into the future has to follow those rules. So those 2 tools are the main tool of a land trust, and we'll be speaking about a little bit of both of them with the invasive project. So as I said, each land trust is unique. The land trust, Genesee Land Trust, focuses on land up along Lake Ontario, significant habitat for migratory birds in particular. We do farmland work throughout Wayne County, which has some great farm soils, some of the best in the United States, and then do connections to nature, working with people in the city of Rochester, Newark, and elsewhere to engage with the outdoors. The Farmland Protection Program, a lot of land trusts in New York State do conserve family farmland, so it's available into the future for farming. The viable business for the local economy, supporting local food systems, so we don't have to haul our food up from the Hudson Valley or California. And then again, those food systems, where our food's coming from, who has access to it, and a lot of the equity work as well, many land trusts deal with. Part of the tool of conservation easement allows for new or younger farmers to get into farming, for example, because placing a conservation easement on a property will lower the price of the property because it is restricting the uses and taking away the highest and best use of the land potentially for development. And the average age of a farmer in the United States is not under 70 years old. So as we think of farmland conservation in particular, it's very important. So other programs Genesee Land Trust does was connect youth from the city of Rochester to nature. We've got an environmental youth ambassador program This is a photo of them from last summer cleaning up a park here in Rochester. And again, focusing on, teaching those future leaders of tomorrow in the conservation field. So I mentioned all land trusts are unique. One of Genesee Land Trust's specific points of interest is a urban rail trail, the Thomas R. Fry Trail at El Camino. Goes through Northeast Rochester, 2.2-mile urban trail, formerly owned by CSX, that connects, again, downtown Rochester with Seneca Park. And it's become a hub for community health and is celebrating 10 years. So this is just sort of a photo from Google Earth that shows part of Rochester along the Genesee River here, which is a great ecological resource, which the state has recently confirmed that they're going to be working on a new state park, the High Falls State Park. So we look forward to being involved with this process and making sure it's done equitably, and see if there's other habitat involvement we can play with the project. And I mentioned those two tools. So our fee-owned lands, ones we own outright, we call nature preserves. They're sort of sprinkled through our region. And then, all of these properties are a little different. Some are more accessible for the public. They really have varying goals depending on land management plans. This one's in Penfield here. That's really designed for young families. It's surrounded by residential development, but a really, really nice evening photo here. And then others, again, trail signage, different restoration projects, sort of our breakdown of our conservation easement lands, from natural habitats to working farms, sort of throughout the region here. And these conservation easements, as I mentioned, they're privately owned. The conservation easement is passed down from landowner to landowner, and as long as Genesee Land Trust exists, this tool is always in place. So it's not the type of thing where a landowner can decide, I'm not going to follow that anymore. I don't like not being able to put in a zip line or a Walmart on the back half of my, 50 acres or something like that. So that's a responsibility of Genesee Land Trust and all the other land trusts to maintain a relationship with secondary landowners and other future landowners, so those habitat goals are protected. So as I mentioned before, if you haven't already, reach out to your local land trust. There's a lot of projects from habitat restoration, planting projects, invasive management, maintaining trails, and everything in between. So they're a great tool for master naturalists in particular. And in addition to my full-time job, I've been sort of volunteering on one of the projects with some private landowners, which I'll get into now. So the project was called Surveying for Emerging High Priority Invasives. We primarily were looking at land trust properties, public ones, the preserves, and the private ones, the conservation easements across the northern Finger Lakes Prism. So goals for this project were to look at really up and coming invasive species, ones that could be coming up from the south or from ports that really aren't identified in New York yet. And do surveys and prioritize sort of our search efforts to different vectors of where the next threat of tomorrow could be coming from. So the Land Trust was able to hire Kyle Webster, a very experienced botanist, to survey a number of properties and to look for a specific list that we put together. So I'll go through a little bit what was found and what comes of the data. So original goals, myself and Kyle wanted to get through at least 500 acres throughout the region, looking for tier 1, 2, and a few 3 and 4 species. I'll explain what the tier listing is in a minute if you're not familiar with that. All sort of search efforts and presence absence data was recorded into IMAP Invasives, which again, I know many of you use it and are familiar with that tool for land managers, and then put together some management recommendations for the landowners. So again, that times that was Genesee Land Trust, other times that was with private landowners on our conservation easements. And typically all the information, a lot of the information that goes into IMAP, for example, comes from public land. So this was sort of a unique opportunity to get an expert out on some private land to sort of see, how is that matching up to some public land. And then put out some guidance for easement landowners, outlining, management actions and everything else. So for this discussion, emerging invasive species, we sort of put together our own list based on the IMAP Invasives, the New York Natural Heritage Program, and information from the Finger Lakes Prism. So the Natural Heritage Program, throughout New York State, focuses on rare plant and animal species in communities in New York State. Through IMAP Invasives, provide tools to land managers to provide habitat and work to restore habitat. The PRISM, again, something I'm sure many of you are familiar with, are the Partnerships for Regional Invasive Species Management. I work in the Finger Lakes PRISM, which is the largest PRISM, and is sort of invasive hotspots throughout, with Rochester, Syracuse, Ithaca, and lots of agricultural land. So we'll talk about that in a minute here. That just sort of goes into vectors for transmission. So if you haven't seen this before, this is sort of the breakdown of the different tiers, sort of 5 different tiers created by the Finger Lakes Prism and New York Natural Heritage. They put this together to sort of prioritize management, knowing that resources are limited. So obviously things that are less common might be easier to manage versus things that are very abundant in the landscape, which will take much more time and effort. So tier 1 are species that are not in the region that we could potentially prevent from coming. Tier 2, there might be small populations throughout the state that we could potentially manage. Maybe there's 5 to 10 in a prism or throughout the state, something like that. Tier 3 are the more widespread invasives, could be more common in certain parts. Again, Japanese wineberry, one that was on our list, that's relatively uncommon in our service area, is more common sort of in the southern part of the region, and I'm sure in some of your service areas. Tier 4, many are familiar with: emerald ash borer, Phragmites, multiflora rose, honeysuckle, where really, it's suggested to only take action on those if it's part of a specific project or protecting a rare species or community. And then you'll see at the bottom, tier 5 here are ones that we don't know impacts, could become invasive, or just need more research on. So again, the tier list, a lot of data goes into that. This map in the lower right sort of shows the orange hexagons, which are the different observations that have come in through IMAP invasives that tell you abundance of certain species. So combining a few tools helps create that tier list. And again, tier 1, really none in the region, but could be on their way. Tier 4, many more observations. And then the New York Flora Atlas, if you haven't used this tool yet, is really fantastic. It's a great tool for experts as well to really collect specimens and to really get down into the nitty gritty of many of these species that might have a slight difference for a certain hair or certain orientation of a plant. So that's another great tool that Kyle used as part of the project to make sure we were identifying everything correctly. So again, the project focused on tier 1 and tier 2 and a few tier 3 and 4 species. I'm sure many of you have seen this before, the invasion curve, where it starts from the left showing prevention all the way up to control. So on the prevention side, these are invasive species that are absent or really just not observed yet. Eradication, maybe a few populations again throughout the state. Then you get to contain here, and they're definitely present, but you're trying to limit their spread. And then you get all the way up here in the red area, and that's control. That's their widespread and abundant, and really long-term management, and a lot of resources going towards that. So on the right side of the screen, you can see the management costs arrow, really high, where it gets very red there, because there's a lot more species. It's going to take a lot more time, energy, and capital to manage them, versus again on the left here, the prevention, not as much resources required and not as much of an impact on other resources. And those tiers we mentioned, correspond, right to this: tier 1, 2, 3, and 4. Prevention is best, and control requires lots of money and time to control. For many land trusts and other organizations that are, don't have many staff members or fairly limited in what they can expend on some management, really it's great if you can do some more of the preventative work before again, they really get away. So I think if all of us had all the money in the world, we would work on invasives among many other things, and try to really protect those important habitats throughout the state, because they are really being hurt quite a bit by a number of issues. Pollinator declines we're all familiar with, and just biomass in general. And as we know, as ecologists, everything is connected, and affecting one thing will affect everything else. So as we get more invasives, that's less biodiversity, and really impacting species up the different trophic levels. And again, you see these all the time, these headlines. North America has lost more than 1 in 4 birds in the last 50 years. I'm sure a lot of folks saw that, and that's over 3 billion birds lost. And a lot of that comes from, suitable habitat for birds. So when we're losing certain trees and shrubs due to competition with invasives, when they just can't compete with, ecologically advantaged invasives that leaf out earlier, that grow quicker, that can, invade really opportunistic species, without food for birds and suitable habitat, populations drop. So really big challenge. Majority of our woody invasive plants in the United States, were introduced for horticulture purposes. You can find a lot of images, a lot of pictures of them. And folks plant them in their yard, in their backyard, and some mixed messaging when it comes to where they're getting those materials, and certainly a challenge with who's allowed to sell them, what they legally have to say on their tags. So quite the challenge. In 1997, a study found that 82% of 235 woody plant species had been used in landscaping. So that's a big challenge. And again, that's from 1997. So you'd really think that has grown quite a bit. So just again, a good reminder, using natives when possible, and thinking twice on what we're using in our landscaping. The other lens here is, of course, thinking through climate change and future hotspots for plant invasion. From the Journal of Applied Ecology 2009, it sort of mapped out areas that, again, will become hotspots for invasion. You can see up where we are in New York State, in the Northeast is pretty red, which means that there's a higher projected change in number of invasive plants. And that's from species moving up from the south, it's from our ports, and really elsewhere, all the other vectors. So again, scary to think about, with climate change and all the uncertainty behind it. And so the idea for this project, bringing it back to the local scale, was to, try to get ahead of the curve, I should say. And that's the goal for so many of us on this call that do work with invasives. It's being as proactive as possible, which can be, again, very challenging with limited time, energy, and capital. So the project at Genesee Land Trust was to survey a number of different public and private conservation lands for those emerging invasive species. I think it was a list of 67 species, those tier 1, tier 2, and a few tier 3 and tier 4 species, and sending, again, Kyle Webster, our expert botanist, out to these properties in the summer and fall to sort of look for those species. How did we prioritize only a few of our conservation lands compared to all of them? We looked at areas with high conservation value. We looked at rare natural communities, helped rank by the Natural Heritage Program, and then thinking through vectors, how invasives, how they spread, what are opportunities for them to become established. Recent land use history, which can include things like logging, clearing garden beds, bringing in equipment, and a variety of other things. And then having the opportunity to access some of this private land was, again, an opportunity to look at areas that hadn't been surveyed. So some of the properties with high conservation value that Kyle visited, included properties on Sodus Bay called Lesa Farms Conservation Easement. We visited other spots up along the lake and just saw some great high quality habitat. The Rock Headwater Stream, in the unconfined river of Glenarga Creek. And this was a neat one that we had. We owned 2 properties along Glenarga Creek. And so visiting both of them was sort of helpful to see, if we had found one invasive in one location and not the other, would help sort of offer some insights and clues to the spread of that invasive. So that was a neat area for Kyle to look at as well. Some of the other high quality habitats, the maple basswood rich mesic forest. Other areas with just high wildflower diversity that were visited, again, ranked by New York Natural Heritage Program. And Kyle spent a lot of time walking around and looking and vouchering and looking through these high quality habitats because, again, if certain emerging invasives were to become established there, they would be a real threat to impacting these ecosystems. A few more photos, sort of the wetland communities that were visited as well. Some high quality species that we always love to see. This lower middle photo is one of the landowners, which Kyle got to paddle around with in, I believe, late summer to look for some aquatic invasives, which was a great opportunity. So some of those vectors we mentioned, those high quality habitats that I was just showing you photos of, they don't always show up in the nicest areas first. I think there's a low chance of finding one right in the middle of a dense, basswood mesic forest, but you never quite know. The more obvious places that are the vectors for these invasives are roadsides, farm lanes, trails, where people are going, where they're moving. We can see in the top right photo, this is up in Greece, New York, and this was in the summer, and you can barely see in the left part of that photo a lot of the dead ash trees. So this property in particular, over 80% of the canopy is ash, and they're all, in various stages of death at this point. But coming in on a major throughway and road like this certainly helped them meet their demise and introduce emerald ash borer. We've got a sort of farm access lane down in the right corner. And you can barely see on the right side some Japanese wineberry, which was one of the ones on our list that was spotted. We've got to think tractors and other farm equipment coming from here, going from farm to farm, with less small farmers who might get more farmers traveling around to help manage farms or working on leased farmland. So another sort of big vector for spread. Utility right-of-ways, you hear this as a vector quite a bit. We've got the rail line in the upper left. I'm pretty sure spotted lanternfly is one in particular that really likes sort of rusty metal and can move on trucks and barrels and trains and everything like that. So that's a large threat. We've got a utility line in the upper right and the lower right. That might get annual mowing from, again, RG&E folks coming in to mow. You hope that they're cleaning their equipment. You ask if they're cleaning their equipment, but you never quite know because it's hard to have capacity to do those inspections yourself and don't know always what you should be looking for. So very opportunistic, as we know from invasives, which is one of the big challenges. Then the other is sort of recent land use history. So, invasives certainly thrive on disturbance. So a few of the conservation easements we looked at, had some changes in the land use in the past. We've sort of got a dumping storage area in the upper left. We've got some logging roads in the upper right that were part of a selective harvest at one of the conservation easement properties. As with the one down in the left corner. And you might be able to spot it in the right, this old garden bed around a farmstead, but there's some little tree of heavens popping up around there. And tree of heaven in particular is either a tier 3 or tier 4 species, so it is very widespread in our prism. But the opportunity that species has as the main host plant for spotted lanternfly and projected impacts to the agricultural industry in particular are very, very high. So our prism, Finger Lakes Prism, has been very active with tree of heaven surveys, with looking for spotted lanternfly and really getting the word out. So this was, again, one that was a little lower on the tier list for the entire region, but more important to us because especially all the work that we do in Wayne County, which does a lot of fruit growing and really has the local economy supported in that industry. So what happened? Our original goal of 500 acres was doubled. Kyle was able to visit 1,180 acres. We surveyed 10 preserves and conservation easements, and that includes 116 hours of survey time. So that number is really astounding. It did not include him driving. It did not include him eating an apple or having a break for lunch. It was all looking at everything growing there and walking the property and doing a fantastic job. So 9 of the 74, I misspoke, I said 67 before, 9 of the 74 target species were seen, including 26 detections on 8 different land trust properties. So the other way to read this for the glass half full folks, that's 65 target species not detected, which is great. Different than rare plant surveying and everything else where you're looking for things. The absence data was, again, very helpful in this project. And it lets us know, since not many of the tier 1 and tier 2 species were seen, that data, the tier listing from Finger Lakes Prism and New York Natural Heritage is accurate. Again, those tier 1 and tier 2 are species that we were not expecting to find, which is, again, good news for us and a testament to the strength of the data coming from New York Natural Heritage and the Prism. So what did we find? The tier 1 that was found was hybrid cattail, and really a large monoculture where this was found on Second Creek in Sodus Bay up on Lake Ontario. Tier 2 was a border privet, and for both of these two, it was Kyle's opinion that both are very undersurveyed because they're very hard to identify from native cattails and some other invasive privets and other privets that we have in our region. So very interesting with those observations. From tier 3, and again, these tier 3 and tier 4 are ones that are special interest to Genesee Land Trust because, again, in our service area, they're relatively uncommon. So working to remove small populations is a little bit more feasible than other parts of the state where they're much more common. I suspect many of you on this call who do deal with invasives, wouldn't want to attempt some of these on maybe some of the lands you're involved with because there are so many of them. So those tier 3 species include the Japanese honeysuckle, Callery pear, the Japanese wineberry, and a European dewberry. The tier 4 were the Japanese barberry, which had popped up in a few of the more wooded properties, and of course the tree of heaven, which I mentioned. And one interesting observation from Kyle was an untiered species, Daphne, which again didn't expect to find, and those untiered listing are ones that we just don't know enough about. So since observations haven't shown up here before, it was a good one to sort of, again, collect that information, voucher it, and enter it into IMAP so that can help inform future iterations of the tier listing. So coming back to that invasion curve, we can sort of see where our results landed from the eradication up to the control method. So again, a lot of those tier 2 species observed, we've got a real opportunity to deal with them before they get away from us. Some, like that hybrid cattail, is it's beyond manageable ability currently for the land trust and the private landowner where it was found. And really those 3 and 4 are ones where, you pick your battles on. So that'll be, that one's a tough one to think about manage, but, potentially in the future, if there's funding available, it would be great to address some of these others. And so this work that Kyle and myself did is very helpful. It goes into Genesee Land Trust sort of work plan for the year, when to get out and manage these invasives that were found, to again be as efficient as possible with limited resources. And part of Kyle's visits, again, were to the private conservation lands, and Kyle put together reports for those landowners so they could take action on their own as well. So this is just some of the data that was put into IMAP. This is Alesa Farms on Sodus Bay, a 647-acre conservation easement. That's a mix of farmland, sort of woodlands, and other sort of farmstead building areas right along Second Creek and Third Creek on Sodus Bay. And you can see again with this into IMAP here, it shows where the observations were made, how many, evaluation, follow-up, and all this great information that was input into IMAP. So the other thing that's important is the non-detection records into IMAP too. I hear from folks that they might not use IMAP because they didn't see anything, which certainly is an easy way to think about it. But if you are still able to use it and input that nothing was observed, that's again a very helpful tool and saves a lot of time for future land managers from surveying the area and providing that. So just stressing those non-detection records are equally important for IMAP. And the goal for the land trust here is to do a similar project, I think every few years. Luckily we had funding for this project through the Finger Lakes Prism to help us hire Kyle and work on this project. But again, especially with climate change and more vectors, really being as proactive and preventative as possible is the goal. So I mentioned a little bit about the information that Kyle was putting together for landowners. So we wanted to make this as easy to read and digest as possible. So ultimately each landowner got a sort of packet that had information about where Kyle walked, what he found, photos of the individual species, lat and longitude of where it was found. On this slide, we can sort of see, a survey result page, which at this property, it shows the Elianthus, the tree of heaven, the barberry, the border privet, and the hybrid cattail, what they were ranked, and again, where he went on the map on the right side, and then the number of species detected versus search time, which was a new sort of concept to me, but a neat tool that Kyle used that, again, on the y-axis here shows number of species detected, and he was keeping track of everything he was seeing as he walked through these properties. And then search time down on the x-axis, which really shows it sort of starting to level out. So once he started leveling out, that's when he knew that he had surveyed most species on the property. So again, a very interesting tool for us to use. 2 other maps here. Again, a number of maps went to the landowner. The map on the left for the Amy's Ponds and 100-acre wood conservation easements in Ontario sort of show in the purple an area recommended for follow-up surveys. So these could be areas that he didn't fully explore, or due to the time of season, they'd make a good candidate for coming back, earlier in the spring, or based on the habitat that's present and the threats that habitat has, would warrant itself for future follow-up or surveying. On the right side, we sort of see the high conservation areas, priorities for conservation that he found, because in addition to the invasives, he was sort of looking for high quality habitat to sort of, again, help us, help the land trust, and help the landowners prioritize their actions on the land. So we can see the ponds and shrub swamp sort of called out here, and hemlock hardwood swamp, silver maple hardwood swamp. which in addition to, we don't like to show up to a conservation easement landowner and say, hey, here's everything wrong with your property. We also want to say, thanks for conserving your property. These are the great things that you have there. And so we wanted to use them as a tool for management, but also, giving pride for that person for choosing conservation, and really letting them think through that, they might want to take action, if the land trust isn't able to help with management. And then each species got its own report with photos, map location. I mentioned that. This is border privet here. So a few little dots in there, which again, if we're thinking about prioritization, those dots where my mouse is just under the pond here are ones that are being pulled out and attacked before they become larger polygons like these yellow ones on the east side of the property. And then again, helpful latitude, longitude, some phenology data, and approximately number of individuals observed for the landowner. So this spring, I've been sharing these reports with the landowners. I've been talking with them about management actions. We've been starting to address a number of them the past month or so on some of the properties. Again, a property I've mentioned twice before, Elisa Farms on Sodas Bay, one of our larger conservation easements at 647 acres in agricultural land, had a number of tree of heaven individuals throughout the property. This one on the left here is a good candidate for a century tree, one to place a spotted lanternfly trap to know when it's coming, so it's adjacent to a road and at the farm fields. But other smaller ones, we've got 2 young volunteers working with a uprooter or the weed wrench, a mechanical device where when the tree of heaven is small enough, it can be pulled out mechanically. Some of the larger ones, obviously the best management practice there is to use a hack and squirt type method with glyphosate. So also in Kyle's reports, it was sort of telling the landowner what's the best tool for the job, what's the best management practice for dealing with it. So again, a helpful tool, giving all the tools to the landowner and to the land trust to manage. So this shows the tree of heaven here. These a different one that the youth were able to pull out. You can see on the right side, that's what was above ground, probably 2.5, 3 feet, and then the root on the other side. And we did the whole thing out. They did a great job, and we're very excited to help. So finding others to help with these projects. I know many master naturalists, might be looking for projects like this one that I'm volunteering my time for. Others have projects too. So again, I'd recommend reaching out to local land trust to see if you're in need of projects. And then just a thank you to the funders of this project, Finger Lakes Prism, New York State DEC, and for all the work IMAP Invasives, the Natural Heritage Program, Finger Lakes Institute do. So, and our special conservation easement landowners who again, privately own the land, and we needed permission for them to send Kyle out there. So those properties as well. And a big thanks to Kyle Webster himself for doing the work and really pushing this project along. So very exciting project. And again, something I hope to do every few years to try to get ahead of the curve when it comes to emerging invasives. So with that, I will conclude and happy to try to take any questions. Let's see, I see a few here. I'll just start, Marla, in the chat.
Yep.
So one from Matthew: can protected land either owned or part of an easement be passed on to another 504 organization with all stipulations left intact? Original Land Trust ceases to exist. Yes, so there is sort of contingency planning that most organizations sort of think about and work on. And, that's obviously a big threat. And I know multiple organizations that have had discussions with other groups and at the board level have talked about, if we do go belly up or aren't able to support our own organization, what happens with the conservation easements. Sometimes there can be dual holding of the easements, but that is definitely something folks do, Matthew. From Dave, when you negotiate an easement or other transfer of property right, do you record that in the county land record office? If not, is there any risk in not doing so? Yes, we do record them because it is a legal agreement. It is a binding agreement. If we ever were to go to court, say, for example, we didn't record a conservation easement and we go out to monitor that property one year and whoops, there's a Chipotle here, or there's a driveway that extends too far onto the boundary, then we don't really have any grounds to stand on saying the landowner signed this, the land trust signed this, this was a recorded agreement. So I don't think we would be looked upon very favorably when it came to enforcement. So as I mentioned too, it is the land trust's requirement to enforce these agreements that we're making. And again, we're visiting them each year to make sure nothing bad is hopefully happening. So it's a tough obligation, but stewardship staff, again, that's their job to do that and maintain those relationships and think if it's the carrot or the stick. And again, working with people on conservation, as we all know, is a challenge and a joy.
Thank you, Kevin. Great presentation, very informative. I actually have one question related to IMAP invasives. A lot of us use iNaturalist, and do you know if the two talk to each other? Does IMAP take some of the data from iNaturalist?
That's a great question, Marla. I don't know off the top of my head.
Oops. Oh no, Kevin, I'm sorry. I muted you by accident.
You're good.
Instead of myself.
I think I'm back.
You are. Sorry.
Yeah, great question. I don't know the answer. I would assume there's folks reviewing some of the iNaturalist observations, but not entirely sure, because I know personally in my free time, it's sort of I want to record something in iNaturalist, but then I want to put in IMAP as well. And you want something easy. That's why these tools are there. You want to be able to record something and move on and make them easy for the public. So that's a great question. I'd have to ask the Heritage Program if they're doing that.
Thanks. Appreciate
it. And I'm pretty sure that the answer to that is no. They're not talking to each other right now. I think that's something that they're looking at, but at this point, it doesn't exist.
Okay, thanks for that.
So I actually have a question. I work with Cornell with the Integrated Pest Management Program, and this project that you talked about was really focusing on plants, which is certainly enough to go on. Right. But one of the things that we're really focusing on right now is the potential invasive Asian longhorn tick. And Wayne County is one of those places that Monroe County is one of the areas that we're really focusing on. This is not one that is particularly fond of people, but it's really a huge livestock pest. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering how many working farms you have under easements, and whether you think that they would be open to having people come and look for this tick.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we've probably got close to 15 to 20 different easements on agricultural land. Again, primarily Wayne County, a few in Monroe County. And, we've got, good relationships with a lot of the landowners. Some I think would be more interested in allowing someone to come and look. I know one individual last summer or spring, when I spotted some tree of heaven, he was very interested in talking about management for it. And he had heard through New York State Ag and Markets about the risk that it played. So I'd been more than happy to, make a connection or see if there's a way that we can get that information out. Because again, some, the original landowners, conserved their land for multiple reasons. And, one of the farmers was literally born on the property, so, their heart's behind it, a lot of them. So I think many would be interested in helping out.
Okay, I will pass along your information to my Cornell contact, who's going to be awesome. Looking at that part of the state. I myself, I'm in Albany, so it's a bit far.
Perfect. Okay, I see one question in from Chris. I think you mentioned a spotted lanternfly trap. Is this something that's available for purchase? Where would I find one, or how can I make one? So great question. Our Prism, the Finger Lakes Prism, was able to supply them to folks interested in them, and I think is doing a training in the next week or two. So I'd first look at their website and see if there's some information there. Matthew Gallo is the point person there. So even if you're able to find his email address or email me, and I can sort of connect you. It's new to me as well, but we plan to put the Lanternfly traps throughout our region. And again, thinking about those vectors. There are some, homemade ones, I think. Some people do a sticky, trap, which, might get more bycatch than the specific spotted lanternfly one. But there's a few different options. I think that the Finger Lakes Prism has information on. Question here from Kate. What is being done in New York about nurseries and landscapers using invasives, or what could be done? If I was the one in charge, it would be, the Finger Lakes Prism and the heritage programs sort of putting those, allowances on what's allowed, what's not. I think ag and markets, DEC and everybody are sort of, working on this at some capacity. I'm curious if others on this call have more information than I do on that, but sometimes all a nursery has to do is list something as, exotic or something like that. I really don't know enough about it, but it certainly led to a lot of problems. And I will drop my email address right here in the chat.
Any more questions? Maybe more of a comment. I know with a lot of plant nurseries and horticulturists, they're very passionate about their varieties that may not be native. And now some of them don't have the risk, don't run the risk as much as others of getting out and becoming an invasive plant. So it's really, it seems like it's really hard to draw the line where where a plant it's a horticulture specimen plant and it's considered something they can sell, and if it wouldn't spread on its own. So I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, that's a great point, Marla. And, that whole untiered listing of the tier species list is sort of like, wait and see. It's a little bit like we're starting to see it pop up. And, as things get warmer too, I mean, we're going to get releases of other species that may be exotic and may just be, existing currently, but, with a few changes in degrees or more moisture or something like that could give them the edge to actually become invasive. So that's the other sort of sleeping giant when it comes to climate change, for example. It's sort of like how to quantify, how to be ready for. It's very scary to think about, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And on that note, I think I heard you mention that the survey would be repeated in a few years. Do you have any timetable for doing surveys or what's ahead? And because climate change is happening so fast now, what are plans for the future to repeat surveys?
Yeah, and that's a good question. I mean, this is the first year that we've done this, and those tier listings, I think, they might be redone every 2 years. I'm not sure. There is a cycle for when they're renewed. So my inclination would be, again, budgeting for someone like this to do this type of work, sort of either at these sites or others on that regular basis to, again, be as preventative and proactive as we can. And that's also educating myself and our other land managers at the Land Trust, our landowners and volunteers, to, again, be on the lookout for these up and coming ones that, again, will pose real threat.
Well, as master naturalists, we're always looking for volunteer opportunities. So people can get in touch with you.
Yep, definitely can reach out to me, and or even if you want to email me and say, hey, who's my local land trust? We've got a good system of network of knowing the folks working throughout the state. So happy to make any of those connections for you as master naturalists. I know, one of the master naturalists, I think Dick, is been working a lot on this Elisa Farms property, which I mentioned when it comes to hemlock woolly adelgid. So a lot of opportunities out there. And again, it plays a big role and a big help for organizations that have limited capacity.
Very good to know. Well, thank you so much, Kevin. Wait a moment for if any more questions come in. Meanwhile, I know Christy usually says what's happening next. I know she asked that recently if anybody's interested in giving a presentation and sharing their knowledge with our group. That would be great. So get in touch with Christy if you have some ideas. Okay. All right. I think we're good. We got some thank yous in the chat.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody, for coming on a beautiful night. I know here in Rochester, it's gorgeous out and very warm. So please get out there if you still got some time. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, please do.